So again, this is Burn Up Coaching, becoming your greatest possible self. We have a lot of fun. We interview leaders, role models, experts, people who are changing the world to help you master yourself, create your reality, and be, do, and have anything you desire as you become your greatest possible self. I'm your host, Chris Burns, America's #1 motivational speaker for fiery inspiration and host of this show. It's a lot of fun and co-founder of Burn Up Coaching. So what we're going to be diving into today is embodying your leadership. We have an incredible lineup for you today, and we have 3 outcomes for everyone who's in attendance today. Number 1, for you in the audience, you show up, you get value. You take a step in the right direction. You become your greatest possible self because of your time invested here today. Maybe you get new ideas, new actions, new relationships, new connections, something to help you move forward. That's our commitment, number 1, to you. Number 2, each of the special guests who comes on, they make a meaningful difference in at least one person's life. Most likely, many, many more. And it all starts with one step at a time. When we get grateful for that one step at a time, when we appreciate that, that's when we're really able to start attracting much, much better and impactful results into our life. And outcome number 3 is that I make a meaningful difference in at least one person's life throughout these 12 hours. I'm 100% sure I've already done that, so I'm giving myself a huge round of applause. Woohoo! Yes. And a pat on the back. Great job, Chris. Keep up the great work. I promise we will 100%. So Kevin is about to come on here in a bit. And before that, this interview is brought to you by Burn Up Coaching and the 21-Day Challenge. And if you are an entrepreneur or a high achiever and you feel like you've been plateaued, you're stuck, you're overwhelmed, you got too much going on, or you just don't know what to do next, you're lacking clarity, you want to kick your energy, your belief, your passion, your drive into overdrive and achieve your top priority in the next 21 days, that's exactly what we'll do. We'll get clear on your year vision, your statement of purpose, your life purpose and vision. Start integrating that. It's not like you'll have, wave a magic wand and all of a sudden you know your life purpose and you'll start taking steps towards it. You'll start becoming that person. So we'll get clear on your 1-year goal, break it down into bite-sized steps so that you can accomplish that in a measurable way, taking daily actions, and then your 21-day challenge goal. That's what we'll get. We'll dial in your daily habits, routines, rituals, all that good stuff to make sure that you're on track. You'll have daily progress reports where you'll turn in your progress to me on a daily basis, and also weekly deep dive calls to uncover the limiting beliefs and the stuff that's keeping you stuck or self-sabotaging. So it's a one-on-one, very intensive, high touch program for the people who are willing to go the distance and achieve their 21-day challenge goal. If you're interested and committed to making it happen, send me a message, chris@beyourgps.com. That's where you can send it, or you can send me a message on Facebook, facebook.com/th3burns, and let me know you're excited to start the 21-day challenge, and we'll see if it's a good fit for you. Cool or cool? Very cool. Next is the iTunes review of the week, which is by You Got Sam. And You Got Sam says, leap into launching your vision. I absolutely immersed myself with this podcast all weekend. I can speak from personal experience. I used to be the #1 procrastinator on the face of this planet. However, after meeting Chris Burns and listening to his podcast and all his content all over social media, I've taken that leap and launched my vision, and it has become a reality in the making. Hands down, so much value and knowledge has been taken away from this podcast. I highly recommend subscribing and taking that leap just like I have chosen to do. Cheers. Thanks so much, You Got Sam. And if you are out there and you want to give us a review, go to beyourgps.com/iTunes or search Becoming Your Greatest Possible Self in the iTunes store, podcast store, and you'll find us like that. Or search Becoming Your Greatest Possible Self on Facebook, and you can give us a review there. Wherever it is, we always appreciate that feedback. We appreciate what you love, knowing what you love, what you want to see more of, or what we can do differently to help make the experience even better for you. So thanks in advance for that feedback. Now, for the man of the hour, Mr. Kevin Ehlinger Wilde. Kevin is a nationally award-winning creative entrepreneur and speaker who overcame the challenges of growing up dirt poor to help top executives, teams, and companies make the most of the resources they have, increase their creative intelligence, embrace change, and discover disruptive market opportunities. In 2001, he founded WildeSpark, an innovation and marketing company that provides highly interactive, creative training, innovation strategies, and team-building solutions. He is the #1 certified trainer for Thinkergy innovation methods, currently used by companies like BMW, Mattel, Nestle, BANF and Greenpeace. He is a creative rebel who is passionate about the impact, innovation, and creativity can have on the quality of our life for ourselves and people around the world. And I met him at the New Media Summit back in April with Steve Olsher. Amazing, amazing group of people and individuals there. So I know that this interview is going to be amazing. We had an incredible pre-interview talk. So make sure if you're listening right now, you stick around till the end because Kevin is full of wisdom. He's full of experience. He's working with really high-level corporations and companies, and he's going to be delivering the gold. So Kevin, are you ready to rock this, brother?
I am. Hey, welcome. Thanks for having me. This is exciting.
You're welcome, man. Thank you so much
for energy. I was listening to you earlier and was just like, hey, how can you do that for 12 hours? Just amazing. But it's great to be on. I appreciate it.
Thank you, man. Thank you. It's great to have you here. We're going to have a lot of fun and be able to receive your wisdom because you've put in some serious time and energy and innovation investment into yourself and becoming your greatest possible self. And now you get to share about that with our audience. So thanks so much for being here, man.
You're welcome. I'm really happy to look forward to sharing some of the things that I've learned about how to stand out, really, and that's really probably the biggest nuggets that we're going to be able to share.
Sweet, awesome, man. So let's dive right into the theme of the day, which is embodying your leadership. So, Kevin, how has this principle or concept of embodying your leadership, how has that played a role in your life? How has it impacted you, your career, your growth, and what does that really mean to you?
Well, the biggest thing with leadership is the fact that, again, it's either you're going to lead, you're follow, or you're going to die. You're just going to kind of get run over by everything else. So if you happen to be a creative entrepreneur, it's really one of the things that really drives you or makes you stand out as a leader is the ideas. And then it's one thing to have ideas, but have the initiative behind them to really kind of drive that forward.
Yeah.
And so that's really kind of what I kind of look for from that is the more you kind of see what the challenges are and actually passionately care about the solution instead of just kind of give it a few words here and there or token acknowledgement. It's actually kind of working towards that goal. That's really what kind of drives it and what inspires others to want to follow you.
Wow. Yeah. So it's the innovation, the pursuit of the greatest evolution, of the creativity, of the newness, of the spark, right? Of the spark of impact and what is possible, like possibility, fulfilling on that possibility, on that vision. As a leader, we have to have that. We have to have that drive, that motivation, or else people aren't going to want to follow us. People aren't going to want to be a part of that vision, to join, to support and assist.
And you can hear, like some of the greatest failures in leadership are really the ones who are very stoic and they just don't have a lot of passion behind the way they address it. They might be brilliant people, brilliant men and women who are really good at what they do, but they just don't know how to convey that in a way that just inspires the people around them. And that can be kind of a challenge. And a lot of the companies that I come across, some of these are excellent. Some of them have excellent innovative leaders and entrepreneurs. Others have become very system oriented, and now they're all about the function, the data, the systems and process. And once they get to that point, they really struggle to kind of, how do you reignite that creative energy? How do you reignite that, that passion behind it? And that's kind of, well, with a lot of companies I work with, that's kind of the biggest pain point, I should say, that they're kind of dealing with.
Yeah, and I hear there's a life in that. There's a life force, a lifeblood, a organic energy in having that innovation. And these corporations who get into so much of the processes in the systems, and they're focused on their bottom line and they're focused on the numbers, they lose sight of that life force and the culture about what made the company so great in the first place.
And really, when you think of it, so a lot of companies are actually started by an idea. Okay, so that's really kind of the spark of a lot of things. And so that's a lot of times that'll be an innovator kind of type of person. And then they'll bring in now they'll figure, hey, we got this great idea. Now we got to promote it. So they bring in the promoters, and then they get people to start filling the orders. Now they've got the orders coming in. Let's figure out, well, how do we start improving our process? So then they'll bring in some of the organizers, and then finally now they'll bring in a systems type of person who is really good at improving the process, getting to the point where we can get every single ounce of profit out of our whole process. Well, the downfall is that a lot of companies get to that point and they get stuck. They don't know how to kind of go back and reinvent themselves to that creative process, or it's a messy process, because the last thing a systems person or process wants is to waste money. And again, innovation isn't really, it's really kind of a messy process, right?
Right.
So there's going to be failures, tons of failures
Yeah.
that aren't going to be profitable, and that kind of kills them. And so good examples would be, okay, so Apple, Steve Jobs obviously is probably the premier example.
Yeah.
So Steve Jobs, who was really that innovation kind of type. He was really good at what he did as far as creating different ideas. They got to the point, let's say, even of the initial computer, and then they figure out, well, what else can we do? So they look at markets. Well, actually, they add the iTunes, and they add iPhone and iPad and all these different things. So they kept on reinventing themselves to be able to do that.
Yeah.
In contrast, you have companies like BlackBerry, great phone, very popular for a long time. They really struggled to figure out, so what is the next thing? How do we go beyond just being a phone, and what else can we do? And so a lot of companies run into that same thing. They can't figure it out.
Well, it's an interesting dynamic, because I heard when Steve Jobs got brought back into Apple, Apple was trying to do way too much. They were trying to be all things to all people, and so he had to like cut down their product line to like, I think there was like 20 or so core things that they wanted to really be great at, and so they mastered those. And then once they had that foundation of profitability again, then they could expand out. So I want to get into that, and how do we know when to innovate and when to be creative and all that good stuff. And before we get there, I want to hear a little bit more for anyone who's just finding out about you, Kevin. Share a little bit more about yourself and what you're working on today, a little bit more about WildeSpark for us.
Sure. So with anybody, one of the greatest challenges we have is, how do we stand out? I mean, it doesn't matter if you're in business or your personal brand. Well, for me, that actually started when I was born, basically. So I kind of grew up on a very small farm. Again, I was the second youngest out of 10. So if you can imagine having 9 siblings that you're constantly competing against for attention, and you've got to figure out how to do it without getting a spanking or whatever else. So you have to be in a good way, right? And so immediately you have to figure out, so what is it that sets me apart, where I can actually get the good attention kind of thing. Well, one of the things I happen to be left-handed, so because of that, I got the seat at the bench at the end of the table. So okay, that was premier seating, so that was good. So I realized, okay, so being different is good. And then I remember being young and drawing a picture of like Charlie Brown or Snoopy out of the newspaper, and here my mom made a comment on it. Probably the only time she really made a comment on it, but for me it was like, okay, well, that's good. Okay, so I got the attention, and it was something unique that my brothers and sisters didn't do. So you realize early on that that's really kind of the leverage. And then of course, growing up on a farm, you realize, how do you make the most of what you have? And so those kind of mentalities, the idea of how make sure you stand out and then make the most of the resources you have, has really been kind of the catalyst for much of what I've done in a career. So I was able to leverage that in my mid-20s when I was looking at becoming a creative director at an agency. I never worked for an agency before. I realized that if I was going to compete for a creative director position, I had to figure out what's going to make them want to hire me that compared to anybody else. And I would really suggest for your audience, that's one of the biggest questions to ask is, why would they pick me over anybody else? So for instance, imagine that you're a mechanic and you decide to get into business because you're a really damn good mechanic, and you realize, hey, I could run my own operation. But then suddenly, forgive me on that. So suddenly, now you get into business, you realize there's 100 other mechanics got into business because they were all damn good mechanics. So what's going to make one person hire you compared to somebody else? And so for me, I kind of figured out, well, my biggest leverage was creativity. So I did a ton of research, read 60, 70 books on it, started teaching courses on it. And next thing you know, I ended up getting hired as a creative director. And then they even said specifically because of all of that additional training. Wow. And again, in my first year, I won numerous awards, including Best of Show. And so it just proved that that was the edge that kind of led it. And so that has led into a career where, again, going from being a creative director to owning my own company, launching a syndicated radio program back in the mid-90s called Motivational Moments that aired across the country on radio. That led into another company I started for Motivational Moments, or Success Gear International, which was a motivational catalog company. And then eventually WildeSpark, where basically I was starting to share those ideas between how do you stand out from a marketing standpoint and innovation standpoint with a bunch of clients.
I want to dive into that. I want to dive into that a little bit more about the fascination about success and motivation, and why your path went that direction when you were like the creative director and focusing on creativity. How did those integrate, and how did you come back to WildeSpark after 2000? How did you go to that motivation and success focus, and then come back? What was that journey about?
Sure. So one of the keys I realized, so I happened to be working at Kirby Company, the vacuum manufacturer
Mm-hmm.
in Cleveland. Well, so many people, once I realized that when I actually got there, I was their design director.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the first time I was actually exposed to self-development, the whole motivational kind of thing. And it was really funny because before that, my aspirations were, well, I just want to make as much money as my father did. My father was a blue collar worker and a great guy, but it was the idea that that was my level of aspiration because I really didn't think about it. And my career was basically going wherever the wind blew. And then suddenly I realized after, listening to Brian Tracy and Dennis Waitley and a bunch of these Zig Ziglars, that I had the power to direct my own sales. So it really kind of turned me on to the motivational kind of thing. When I became a creative director, I had one of our clients had an idea to reach out to small businesses. And they wanted to appeal to them. Well, the best thing would be a 1-minute motivational message on a radio program. Fortunately, it didn't make sense for them to do it locally, but it made great sense for potentially a national show. And next thing you know, I leave the agency and I launched that as a national program.
Wow.
So yeah, so again, it's taking a risk, which is welcome to creativity. It's setting sail, and who am I to grow up on this small Minnesota farm to be launching a national radio program when I know nothing about the industry?
Right.
But again, that's part of the entrepreneur's journey.
How did you learn more about innovation, creativity going through that phase of your life?
Well, again, when I did a ton of the research, Michael McCalco and Tony Buzan and all of these books I would read on how they approach that, and it's very systematic. And I would sit down and I'd interview like the head of innovation at 3M and find out how they approach it. And even they have an amazing acceptance of failure or acceptance of the creative process, where they actually give like 4 hours a week was dedicated to allowing their engineers to work on anything they wanted. And it was just that idea that sometimes you have to play, and you've got to have to get off of the idea of just being system oriented and every hour that you work has to be billable. And so they've really done extremely well in that kind of approach. And that being part of it. So that's where I kind of had that foundation, having to, again, working as my drive, I guess, to become a creative director, led into tons of knowledge behind the innovation field, which is only expanded now as what I call like this era that we're in is really kind of like the innovation age, that creative revolution that's happening, because so many people can make a huge difference and leverage their own personal brands and get ahead or create new products based on their own creative intelligence.
Beautiful, beautiful. I love it. So thanks for sharing about the journey and that evolution. I want to also go into WildeSpark and how that journey has been over the last about 15, almost 20 years. So let's dive into what that evolution has been like, some of the things that you've learned and challenges that you've overcome in that process.
Yeah, so it's one of the greatest things with WildeSpark is the fact that you get to work with a wide variety of clients. So I probably worked with 500 different CEOs and companies, and the fact of how they approach business, and it's everything because we don't. WildeSpark doesn't specialize in one industry, so we can do things within the healthcare, manufacturing, banking, really a wide kind of set of people we're approaching, and the principles of marketing innovation are always the same. So the industry has its own little quirks. So for each one, we've kind of learned that aspect to it. Yeah. So for us, it was all about, so what are the strategies? It comes down to what's going to make you stand out in the field compared to your competitors. And that's one of the key things we always kind of looked at. What's going to get their attention? What's going to resonate with the audience? So it's a lot of emotional IQ as well as creative IQ, really kind of getting that empathy, what is really going to resonate. So we really kind of worked really well with that. And then going beyond or embracing some of the new technologies, a lot of the digital, the email marketing, the websites. And then we did things like an interactive email where I'd be able to, within a video, type a message onto, say, a billboard. and I'd send that off to you. Or here's a great example. So we did this for a college that was promoting something. So, you know, in high school, everybody kind of like passes a note back and forth. Well, so we did this great video where basically people would pass a note, they'd open it up, and on the screen, you'd read a message. And then they'd fold it up and they'd pass it to the next person. And here'd be a slightly different message. And they keep on going until there's probably 8 messages within this little video. Well, we had it so that once you actually sent it off to somebody, you type in those custom messages for each one of those panels, you'd send it off to somebody, they were able to change all the wording in those and send it back to you or send it to somebody else. Wow. So a great kind of thing. And it was highly successful for the client for some of those but again, it was a financial struggle for us because we weren't effective in selling. Again, it's one thing to be creative and have the ideas, but you still need to have structure and the people around you who are effective at doing some of the things that you're not good at. Yeah. And that's where, you know, again, some of these innovation profiles that you see, like tips, maybe we'll talk about that later, are really good at identifying what are your strengths and what are your weaknesses, and then how can you compensate for those. And that was, but again, that was one of those examples of what was highly successful and yet can still be in one sense and can still be a failure in another sense.
Yeah, because it's there's so many different aspects to success. Someone could say, I'm a success because I put on my pants today, right? That makes me a success, but they may not be successful when it comes to making their relationship thrive, or they could be successful in their relationship but not in their business, right? So there's so many different dimensions of life, and by that same token, in business, right? Someone could be a success financially, but it could come at the cost of the environment. It could come at the cost of their employee and worker morale. So I think that the innovation applies to all those areas. Like, now we got a good formula with this note passing thing. How do we actually make it sell now? How do we actually, make the system sell for us so that it brings in more revenue? How do we tie it back to us providing the service or the product so that it brings in more customers more often who want to pay more?
And that's one of the things that we really work closely with clients on, is figuring how to monetize it. It's one thing, there's, the old saying is ideas are a dime a dozen, and it's true because it's easy to come up with the ideas in some degree. The challenge is, how do you put them into action? How do you actually turn them into revenue where they're not going to be a total time suck or financial suck on your revenue or your business? And so for us, it's really about that approach, and a lot of it has to do with the process in which you kind of do that. How do you set up an innovation system within your company that's not just random, but actually is systematized, so you can go from the concept, first of all, figuring out what is the challenge you want to solve, what are the ideas that are going to help resolve it, how do we evaluate those so we get them down to the ones that we know are going to be probably the most viable, then how do you put those into action? And so that's a lot of what we work with clients on, is that systematized approach to innovation, which makes it very easy for them to kind of do on a regular basis. Yeah, and you're right, because it can be a challenge.
Yeah, and what comes to my mind is a lot of people might have really great ideas, and the execution falls short. And a lot of people might be really good thinkers and critical thinking, great at systems, and they're not very good at the innovation and the imagination and the creativity. So I'm curious, do you think that is it often that people have both of those, or that one person can tap into both of those, or do they need support? Do they need systems to help them leverage the aspects where they might be weak?
And I think that's probably the biggest challenge, I think, for the solopreneurs, is the fact that we're good at a few things, but we kind of lack in some of those other areas. So coaches and the people who hold us accountable, like yourself, those programs like your 21-day challenge are the things that really raise a lot of awareness of where you might be lacking that, or help you develop the skills so that you don't need that. And I think that, that's why, the value of what you can bring to a person with that program is huge, because of that aspect to it. So, but you're right. It is. Some people are really fairly balanced, and so if we went through, say, the TIPS assessment is kind of unique in the fact it's got 11 different profiles, and one of those happens to be an all-rounder. So that's a person who's kind of good at multiple areas, and we break it down generally to the four, what I call the four main intelligences. So most of us are familiar with IQ. Okay, so that's in our chart we call them theorists. These are people who are really good. They're educators, they're the scientists, all of that. Then we have people on the opposite corner of that who are emotionally intelligent. They're kind of the nurses, the customer service people are really good at that. Well, the two additional that we don't really talk much about are the systems people who are excellent at the process, and they like incremental change. They're really good at the details. They're excellent managers. And then the people on the opposite corner of that are the creative entrepreneurs. These are the highly innovators. They have tons of ideas, but these tend to be high-level thinkers, very conceptual, very visually oriented. They don't like a lot of numbers. So it's just like the total opposite of what you'd want for a systems person.
Right.
And the funny thing, in reality, is that a lot of companies are started by these innovators who are kind of like that, very light on detail, and yet they want to get investors and they want money from banks, and all the banks are on the opposite side. They want the details, they want everything else, and so that's where some people struggle. But the more you're aware of that, then easier it is to kind of communicate or kind of find out where your weakness is, and either find teams or support systems that allow you to be successful.
Beautiful, beautiful, man. So I want to dive into some of those support systems that we can create or utilize to create more innovation, to create more creativity in our lives, in our businesses. Where should we start, Kevin? Where do we start to understand creativity, to understand innovation, and really start mastering this aspect of constantly growing, constantly evolving, constantly looking at things in new ways that help us progress and become our greatest possible self?
And like I said, it does come down to the idea of looking at your greatest possible self and how am I going to master that? So, so one of the ways is figure out what are your strengths or weaknesses. Do that self-analysis. Again, we have a program called TIPS, and so as you mentioned in the intro, so I'm the #1 trainer for Thinkergy within the U.S. that does. They're based out of Asia, and they do a ton of work within the Asian and European market, and they're just launching in the US. So, but this TIPS innovation profile is the only profile system. It's kind of like Myers-Briggs, only on steroids. I mean, it provides a lot more. It's the only profile really about innovation and business that really integrates it and has a lot more application. So, but what you get out of it is you really find out, okay, so where do you resonate? Where do you fit within a company? Where are your strengths or weaknesses? What are the ideal roles that you can play within a company? Where do you fit within the innovation process? And just that self-awareness helps you kind of lay the foundation for where you can kind of grow. And then there's other things you can do, such as implementing the systems and taking those approaches. For the most part, again, when it comes down to innovation, we're all 100% creative. Well, at least we all started out that way. A lot of us, the biggest challenge is that we've conformed. And we're afraid to kind of go beyond that. A lot of us started out when we were kids and our parents said no more than they said yes. So we start to conform. We get into, grade school and instead of color in a picture, grass is always green. That becomes more conforming. We take tests and instead of open choice, they're basically multiple choice. They say, well, one out of these four is correct and the rest are wrong. So as soon as you find the first right answer, you stop looking. Okay, well, yet in life, we know that there's multiple right answers, but which is the best one? And so it's those kind of approaches. And then, of course, we get into the workplace, and most people are so afraid of rocking the boat or disrupting things that they conform even more and they don't do much. So being the idea that, the creative rebel is the one who does see things. They're always open to being aware of these different ideas, possibilities. Almost anytime you're given a new challenge, you figure out, so the first thing I do is kind of figure out, so why are we doing that? And I refer to it almost as zero-based thinking. And the idea behind zero-based thinking is that if we weren't already doing what we're doing and we had to start this all over, what would we do? Would we do exactly the same process? If we would, that's great. But if not, let's look at different ways that we can potentially do it. And usually that creates a lot of unique insight.
So I'm curious, how much time would you recommend dedicating to something like that, and what kind of results have you seen companies, like what have they discovered out of doing this process?
Well, the amazing discovery is just that self-awareness of who everybody else around you is. So 2 weeks ago, I did a program for a company, and we brought in 8 executives from their team. And the amazing thing was that, well, while some companies I've worked with are very heavily balanced in one way or the other, these guys were perfectly balanced around the entire aspect of it. But they didn't know that. And so the communication, they had several different, conflict issues just because of the fact that the communication styles are so different. And so they were dealing with that. Some of the people weren't necessarily maybe in the right role where they could have been, far more effective. But this awareness kind of realized that, hey, right now I have you doing, a lot of system kind of work, and actually you should be doing a lot more marketing, which is kind of an opposite, just
That's
given
huge.
their profile.
That's huge.
Right. And suddenly it made that person a lot happier because now they're doing something that was really intuitive to them, as opposed to dealing with, say all the numbers and details that was always a struggle. But they just figured, hey, I'm contributing to the company. And so suddenly we become more productive and everything else. So from the results standpoint, it reduces conflict, people in their best place. And from an innovation team standpoint, one of the things we found is that a lot of companies, let's say that you and I own a company and we decide, hey, we're going to invent a new product. So we get together, we're just going to grab 6 to 8 people, we're going to gather around a room, we're just going to start brainstorming ideas. Well, if we have the wrong people in the room, they're going to kill the process, they're going to kill the ideas before they even start. And so we help identify, when you put together those teams, who are the people that should be on the team and who shouldn't. Some people are very prone to change and they're really open to it, and other people will do everything they can to kill it and sabotage it. But that doesn't mean they're still not valuable to the process of innovation. For instance, you and I could come up with, again, 50 different ideas. In fact, one company we came up with in a 2-hour period, we came up with over 260 ideas. Wow. And later and that was just, a 2-hour session in the morning. In the afternoon, we went through an evaluation process. And we narrowed it down to 36, and we pitched it to the people who are the critical thinkers, to the systems kind of people. And they shot a bunch of holes in it, which is exactly what we wanted, because we're so optimistic, right? Hey, we're all the optimists. Man, I would suck at poker just because I'd be so optimistic. Well, I'm going for a flush. I'll get it on the next card, so I go all in, kind of thing. So I'd fail, and I have. And so it's being the optimist is not a good thing when it comes to poker, and it's not necessarily a good thing when it comes to launching new products. You want somebody who comes in and says, this is what you're missing. This is what you're missing. This is why it'll fail. And then you want to figure out, can you resolve that? And if you can, great. And if you can't, well, then it just wasn't a good idea anyway. Right. And one of the greatest struggles we run into is people fall in love with their own ideas. And it's so hard to get away from an idea that you fall in love with. Because first of all, it's about you. So a lot of ego driven, and it plays a big part in the challenge. Again, there was a CEO I worked with not too long ago who had an idea to launch a product. And they were all set to kind of go with it because it was his idea and he's the CEO. But we convinced him to kind of go through this 1-day X idea training session or innovation kind of session. At the end of the day, his idea still made, the final cut of the top 12, but it didn't make the final 3. Because we came up with better ideas and different approaches. And it wasn't that his idea was wrong or anything. In fact, we got a lot of great information from it. It just showed that sometimes if you get stuck on one idea, you don't see the other possibilities around it. And that's really kind of the value to it.
Yeah, and I love this discussion because entrepreneurs in general and people who have a message, influencers, authors, speakers, coaches, I will speak on behalf of myself, and I think on behalf of all of us, we're so excited about the possibility of impacting people's lives and what that could be like and what that could feel like and that experience, that we don't take the time to play the devil's advocate for ourselves. We don't take the time to think out, okay, so there's all this possibility and innovation and ideas and creativity out the wazoo. What is the worst case situation? Like, what is the worst case scenario? What if this doesn't go right? What if not every single person who I walk up to actually wants to buy? Right. So it's like, I think it's such a relevant conversation today in the world of everyone seems to be wanting to be an entrepreneur. A lot of people want the freedom. A lot of people want that time and money freedom. And I think this is so important because it's like, yes, your idea and your vision is important and it's valuable, and be open to pivoting, be open to other things being even more effective. And especially on my journey of personal development, I've had to learn that. I've had to learn that maybe this team and this idea and this concept wasn't the thing that would get me to $1 million. And I learned valuable lessons and wisdom along the way. So it's like you have to learn when to start things and what really to go after, and also when to say, okay, it's ran its course, time to innovate, pivot, and or go back to the drawing board and create some new ideas, some fresh perspectives, processes, systems, all that good stuff.
And one of the challenges I've seen, and it kills me when I come across it, but I've had several people, in the last 2 years who've approached me who've already gone through the patent process on an idea.
Ooh.
And they haven't really thought it through. So they've spent, $10,000, $20,000 on this idea just to get the patent, and then have no idea if it's even market viable.
Gosh.
And they aren't. In one case, it was a great idea, but again, it was a hardware product, and I actually went to several hardware stores, and they kind of got it, but he couldn't figure out how to actually get it in, and it wasn't working, and it wasn't resonating enough because the need wasn't quite there. And again, he invested $20,000 into it. So now you get into another product where this guy had this unique idea for a business card that folded, and you can actually slide the business card into your USB drive and it would work. Well, he again invested thousands of dollars into his patent process. Well, what he didn't realize is there were some things that were somewhat similar. I did a search for less than 5 minutes, and I found 3 other products that are relatively similar that would have made his so just kind of blend in. So same thing. He fell in love with his idea, didn't bother to do the research to see if it was really that unique, or he thought his was so innovative in comparison that, again, the ego got involved and it failed.
So in that initial idea phase, just to recap, if we've already covered it, or to set these ground rules, how do we take an idea to execution and to reality? Is there a system or a process or a framework that you would recommend? A couple steps that we go through, like market research, or testing the idea, or asking for feedback from someone who we respect, or anything like that. Anything you can give us like that, Kevin?
Yeah, so I had the pleasure of going through the Mayo Clinics. Mayo Clinic is unique in the fact that they have an innovation center. That's actually, it's a huge area, and it's really kind of dedicated to doing some of the latest things. And as soon as you walk into the center, the unique thing about it is that right on the wall, they said, think big, move fast, and fail quickly. Or the idea basically that we want to fail fast. Right. And it is really the fact that, test it out small, do some small innovations, and then see if it's going to work out. And so for anything that you think has possibility. So when we go through this process, I mentioned the one that, again, we sat down with a team of, I think it was 6 people, came up with 260 ideas, narrowed it down to, the top 12 fairly, by the afternoon. And then we narrowed it down to the top 3 that we thought had the most potential. And then we put together action steps. And part of those action steps are to do the market research now. Let's find out, is this truly viable? What else on the market is even close to it? How would this impact our industry? What are the potential applications for it? Is it going to make a lot of sense? And then if it's, say, a product, we look at how can we prototype it very quickly. 3D printing is amazing because of that aspect where we can actually physically see it. And is it something that actually resonates with potential customers where we think it's going to work? So that's part of the thing that we actually do. And it's, that's what helps people get there. So again, just like the Mayo concept of, again, you want to have these big ideas, but you want to really be able to, fail fast in it. And if it does stick, well, then we add a lot more resources to it. But again, the whole idea is that you just don't want to start with one idea. It's like if you and I were to enter in a competition to grow roses, these are great flowers. We wouldn't just plant one flower; we plant a whole field, and then we pick out which is the one that we want. Well, the same thing with ideas. So this CEO who came and he had this one idea. That was kind of the concept I shared with him. Is the idea? Well, it's great to have this one, but what if we had a whole field of ideas you could pick from, and maybe yours is still the best one, but there might be some other ones that are even better that we can kind of leverage, and that's really the full impact and the potential behind it.
I love it. I love it. So to spark more ideas, would you recommend, I know you mentioned if we were to start all over again, what would we do differently? What would we be doing now? That sounds like a good mental process, a good mental framework, a place to stand from to say, okay, let's let's inject some creativity, let's inject some inspiration, some new fresh ideas into our regular life, our regular, week to week business. Is that what you would recommend? Is there any other processes? And how about frequency? How often would you recommend going back to the drawing board, and especially for the entrepreneur who feels overwhelmed and stressed out, or someone who's a professional, who's like, or even a mom, stay-at-home mom who feels like, I don't have enough time to innovate. Like, tell me to innovate. I just need to get this thing done. I need to pick them up from soccer practice.
Right. Again, it's that idea that you're working so much in your business, you're not working on your business, right? Yep. Again, so that's that same kind of process. And we would really recommend, there's an old saying that says, well, it's the idea of thinking outside of the box. And to me, it's not about thinking outside of the box or in the box. It's really about busting down the whole box itself. You have to be able to think outside of the box on a regular basis. And that can be quarterly or every 6 months, even if you want to have those bigger concepts. But again, with anything, in order for it to be effective, you have to go from the ideation, that can be really wild ideas, into the actual application and action steps behind it. And so, there's a number of techniques. And for us, it's really, a lot of us have heard of these creative techniques or strategies, say brainstorming. But there's a number of others. And I actually have a giveaway we'll talk about a little later that has 7 different, creative exercises or techniques that you can use to actually be innovative right away. And one of them is a thing called Scamper. And so the idea of Scamper is really about questioning. So what can you substitute? What can you combine? What can you adapt? Some of those kind of things. What can you modify? What can you minify? So in all these different techniques do is really kind of just expand your mindset. It's like digging a hole for an idea. What this does is just helps you start a lot of holes across a whole wide field. And in order to find, if you're digging for a buried treasure and you keep on digging in the same hole, you're just not going to get very far. Right. But if you can kind of expand it and go wide expanse, kind of like the movie Holes, where they were just kind of digging tons of holes, that was the idea. Eventually you're going to hit gold. And that's the concept. And that's what these creative exercises do, is they kind of just expand our mindset. So when you talk about, what are we going to do? How often should we go back to it? It's really going to be, it's worth dedicating, even for this company that had this one idea. They were going to invest, hundreds of thousands of dollars into this one concept the CEO had. And so it's worth taking that step back, thinking, even if it's just a 4-hour session, or an 8-hour session, go through and think of what are we really going to do? What's the best way forward? And then just keep coming back to that on either quarterly or, every 6-month basis.
Yeah. So powerful. And then the process of innovation itself, what are some of the pitfalls that you see or have seen companies or individuals going through the innovation process? Can you give us any more pitfalls or things that we should be watching out for when we get a new shiny object, or when we get a new idea, or anything like that in the evolution of idea to reality?
Yeah, and one of those, I guess, would be the fact that it's not market tested. So I mentioned before the ideas of these people who really kind of have these ideas and invested in the patent, and they've gone too far in one area without kind of seeing the market. And everything's market driven. So you really got to be able to kind of test it and get some feedback, especially from customers or prospects. That is really the key aspect of what's going to work. So the biggest pitfall I see is people spending money in the wrong areas. Either they spend money on the one idea without seeking the second right answer. And because of that, they kind of invest too much in one direction. The other pitfalls I see are ego. Tons of CEOs with egos that just want to control everything. And so because of that, they end up failing because they're not willing to allow investors to help them, even though they might inspire investors, but they're not willing to give up part of the revenue and everything else because they think this is going to be, a $10 million idea. And so they want to value it at $10 million. I mean, we've all seen Shark Tank with some of these people coming on. But the reality is, hey, you've only sold, $50 worth so far. So again, so what are you going to do really? Right. And so those are some of the pitfalls you run in. And it's just, human emotion. A lot of times it's just, how do you work around that?
Powerful. What is your process for innovating and creating new, fresh ideas for yourself, Kevin? What are your go-tos that you find yourself diving into these days?
So probably the 2 or 3 I do. First of all, I do a process we call like walk in their shoes. It's just really kind of the idea. You just, even from say a marketing, I grew up in my early career was a lot in the marketing area. So if I'm doing a campaign and I'm trying to sell, let's say, shoes to women who are 50 to 60, what's going to resonate with them? And so you just kind of imagine being that client, opening up a newspaper and you're reading the newspaper, and what is the headline that's going to get your attention? What is the visual that's going to get your attention? So this idea of imagining, putting yourself in their shoes, what matters to them, what are the pressures, what are the things that are really going to have that? And so it's really that idea of empathy, putting yourself in that aspect. So that's the one I use a lot. Another one is called break it down, and that's one of those that's in that manual. So the idea is, a lot of times, let's say we're inventing a new bicycle, we kind of get overconsumed with the idea of the whole concept of it, but what if we broke it down into the actual piece? So we look at all the different aspects of a bicycle, whether there's the frame, there's the handlebars, there's the pedals, there's the wheels. So let's just take the handlebars. Let's see, what can we do that would be different there that would make a difference? What can we do with the pedals that would make a difference? Can we add a grip? Can we add straps? What can we do with wheels that would make a difference? Can we make them solid? To prevent flats? Could there be different materials? What are those aspects to it? As soon as you do that, you realize that, well, it's not about changing everything. Now, again, even in a company, a lot of people feel that, well, if you want to be innovative, you got make these radical changes. And actually, even if you just do 1% improvement in 100 different areas, that's 100% improvement. Totally. And the same thing for ourselves. I mean, we don't have to change ourselves radically. You can be creative just by walking into going up to a refrigerator, opening a door, and figuring out what you're going to have for supper. In fact, a really good friend of mine, Judy Zimmer, does a little exercise where she'll actually go to a person's place and she'll cook them supper with absolutely everything that's just there. When she offers it, she said, don't go out buy anything. I'm just going to go into your cupboards. I'm going to go into your refrigerator, and whatever's there, I'm going to make you this amazing meal. And she does. And she's just remarkable at it. And she does it as just a fun, creative challenge.
Wow, that's awesome. And I hear the muscle of creativity. It's important to develop that muscle, that ability to tap into that. And I think sometimes we might get overwhelmed by all the different things that we can be creative about. But if we just focus on one thing at a time, like you said, it doesn't have to be a massive shift. And I love how you mentioned just choosing what you're going to eat for dinner. That's a creative act. Just choosing what you're going to wear. That's a creative act. Choosing what you're going to write, what you're going to say. Communication is a creative act. And I love that you started off by saying everyone was born 100% creative, but people get into these beliefs that they're not creative. So for someone who believes they're not creative, what would you recommend to those people?
And for those, again, it's looking at the small successes. We always talk about affirmations, things like that. But if they truly looked at their life, they'll find that there's actually a lot of different ways they can be creative, or they are already. And then it's like, now start doing something a little different. A lot of times the people who aren't, say, creative, as we would say, judge them, are the ones who kind of fall into a rut. They get into routine. They really like structure. And that structure can be kind of the death aspect to it. So they listen to radio, to sales all the time. They eat some of the same things almost all the time. I've got 8 different kind of radio stations I'll listen to, or I won't listen to anything. I'll just listen to the sound of the road. I'll drive different ways to work instead of always the same way. Just try different aspects of it. There's a lot of ways, even those little things that can do it. Read different magazines. We fall into such ruts, and I think that's the biggest downfall for so many people. They just don't do anything different. So whether it's, creative doesn't have to be grabbing a paintbrush and going and painting. It can be those little things. Taking a walk in a different direction, walking backwards, walking sideways. Just try some of these different things and exploring in that way. And that's, to me, those are the eye-opening things that I found. And the other thing I found, again, even with some of these creative things, it's really about becoming more open to change, being more aware of what's out there, changing your perspective. So you and I will play a little game now. I call What If. Okay, so there's a lot of these what if kind of things. And so one of my favorites is, so imagine the world where people never stop growing. So what if people never stop growing? So by the time that let's say by the time we're 20, we're all 6 feet tall. Every single one of us is 6 feet tall. By the time we're 40, we're 12 feet tall. By the time we're 60, we're 18 feet tall. And by the time we're 80, our grandparents, basically, now they're going to be 24 feet tall. So if you live to be 100, next thing you know, you're 30 feet tall. So how would that change things? And so, we kind of go back and forth. So in your mind, how do you think that might change things? Just one idea that you think might.
Yeah, well, first of all, like that, there would have to be buildings that have to scale, buildings and facilities and whatever, what applications, things, like this clipboard would have to scale. There would have to be a scaling function that builds into everything that everyone does. A car that can scale, and that's built in, or at least it would open up a bunch of different market segments of, hey, we're marketing to the 6 feet, we're marketing to 12 feet, we're marketing to the 18 feet. So it would create a lot more diversity and opportunity for people to capitalize on those niche markets. And so I think it would create a lot more opportunity.
Yeah, but again, it's also the challenge of, so vehicles. So obviously all the cars would have to be a little different. All the public transportation would be different. The roadways, so if you've got a car that's got a 30-foot grandparent, a 100-year-old grandparent in it, and they're driving down, well, that 30-foot person isn't going to fit in just a narrow lane. So suddenly transportation is totally different. Wow. You mentioned the idea of buildings. Okay, well, our beds are going to be different. Are you going to feel comfortable bringing your 3-foot tall grandchild to go visit your 24-foot tall 80-year-old grandmother? It's like, it's actually, when you think of it, it's just amazingly convenient that we stop growing so that can happen. But we'd use a lot more resources. We'd probably have to again ship the 30 feet tall people to certain parts of the country.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah, there's different cities for those heights, because that's the only place where you'll fit.
Right. So it's amazing how different that could potentially be. Wow. And really, it's just a matter of perspective. So what if does, and again, obviously it's not real everything else, but it just helps trigger that idea, those thoughts, that imagination kind of aspect. Yeah. So another one would be, again, so what if we were all the same race, we were all the same height, and we all lived in countries that had exactly the same resources? So right now there's such great disparity that adds all to this, the racism, the disparity of third world countries, everything else, where one, again, has the ego that they're better than everybody else, and everybody else hates them because they have some things that we don't, which is what causes wars. So how would that change things? Again, so sometimes it's just playing some of those games can lead not necessarily to your answer, but it stretches your mind where now maybe there's something else that might trigger where you can kind of come down and figure out, well, how can we create that type of scenario?
Yeah, well, also, these are out of the box kind of examples of like, stuff that is really far fetched, and we could I see that we could potentially apply the what if to something immediate in our business. What if we weren't able to meet people live in person? We had to do everything over the internet. What if we weren't able to do video communication anymore, and it had to all be through text? How would we coach people, like, for example, for my company? So it's like that what if can start stretching our minds in new ways to think of new approaches or something that's exciting or innovative or different or unique, to be able to bypass the noise in the marketplace, because that's one of people's biggest challenges. So I wanted to touch on that just a little bit for innovation and marketing. I wanted to ask you something specific about that. Is marketing as a whole, marketing is super important to be innovating. Oh, for people who don't feel like they have enough wiggle room in their growth, or at a startup phase, or they don't have enough manpower, they don't have enough resources, and they want to innovate their marketing, how do they go about doing that? How can they start on that? How can they invest into innovation in their marketing, and why is that important for them?
Again, that goes back to kind of that early thing we talked about, is how do you stand out? Mm-hmm. So the biggest thing is figuring out, so the first thing I do with clients, or I would recommend to any of them, is take a look at your marketplace, see what your potential customer competition is doing. What can you do from a messaging standpoint that's going to make you stand out? What can you do from either creating or adding a new product or service that's going to make you stand out? Because if you don't have anything that makes you unique, then don't market, because you're not going to be unique. So don't waste your time, don't waste your money, and invest all your time and energy into finding something that does make you unique. And And so that's one of the biggest things. And once you have that, now you figure out, well, how do I get that in front of people? So if I've got a limited budget, so for instance, you look at creative ways of marketing, the guerrilla marketing kind of things we've kind of heard about. Well, let's say there's a spa. So there's a spa client we worked with, and we kind of figured out, okay, so now their main clients are going to be these upper level, females, 50 plus. We want to appeal to them. So what can we do most cost effectively that's going to work out for us? So we looked at how can we co-market. And so we looked at, well, who else has the same client that wouldn't be competing? So dry cleaners, same kind of thing right there. So what we did is we actually took all the hangers that dry cleaners hand out, had an ad basically for this spa with a special discount. In exchange, the spa was handing out discounts to the dry cleaner. Win-win situation, zero cost involved, double their exposure as far as their market. Again, creative way of doing it without any investment at all. It's all about figuring out what are the win-win situations that we can kind of create for everybody. So another way that we look at is not everybody needs 1,000 new customers or even maybe 100 customers. Maybe it's just 10. If you had 10 really key clients, what would be the best way to approach them? And so we do a thing we call dimensional mail. And so it's anything from sending something in a box that's really kind of unique that gets their attention instead of just a postcard. Maybe it's, so in one case, we had a client that was a contractor. And one of the things they specialized in was the fact that people could just sketch anything and they'd be able to turn that into reality from a construction kind of standpoint. And so we basically sent a lot of their prospects, it was 20 that they were targeting, and we sent them an Etch-a-Sketch with their logo on it and everything else and said, hey, you sketch it, we'll do it. Wow. Again, got the attention, got a lot of appointments. We did it for a bank client that was looking at getting some businesses. So we sent out a absolutely freshly baked loaf of bread that still smelled like it was just baked, and said, hey, if you want to make your dough rise, give us a call. The next week, we sent out a golf ball that said, hey, we can help you deal with the hazards in your business. But with that golf ball, we actually had it in a goldfish bowl with a goldfish swimming around. And so his idea was like in a water hazard. So again, highly stood out, very low cost, but it got the attention. And out of the 20 that they were targeting, they landed 6 of those clients.
Wow. That's awesome. I love it. Yeah. I love it. Great examples, Kevin. Yeah. So this is so powerful. I love innovation. I love creativity. And I know our audience is having a lot of fun with this too. So let's begin to wrap up. Final takeaways from this interview on innovation, on creativity, and really standing out in the marketplace.
And again, it is really about figuring out what is it that makes you unique. That's the idea I call creative intelligence. The more you're able to leverage it, and creative intelligence is more powerful today than ever before. If you look at some of the skills that all these, even the top executives in Fortune 500 companies have been interviewed and asked, what is the trait, the number one trait that you really value most within an employee? And the number one trait is creativity. They want people who can think critically. It's one thing to have great education, but if you can't figure out how to apply that and be a critical thinker or apply your creativity to it, it's no value. So they value that idea of the creativity, emotional intelligence, all those kind of things. But creative intelligence goes beyond just the initial. You can use it for personal, use it for your team intelligence, the idea of company intelligence, and then what's happening in the marketplace. Spotting trends, package of those trends, that's huge. And so as far as the takeaway, I would really look at, again, what makes you unique, stand out in that way, leverage it as much as you can and really promote it. And that's going to bring out the biggest payback.
Boom. I love it, Kevin. This is awesome. So people definitely want to know how to stay connected with you, how to keep growing with you. You mentioned a GIF earlier. So let's give them those details on how they can continue the journey with us.
Sure. So I mentioned tips. Well, one of the cool things that I'm going to available to your audience is there's a free download of the 11 tips profiles, and it gives them a sense of they can just kind of read through each one of those and get a sense of who they really are, and that'll give them at least a basis to kind of see who they are, and maybe they can identify who their spouse is or their coworkers are too, and will help them again from that creative intelligence standpoint. There's also a free guide on 7 ways that you can be creative right now. And again, these are some of the, touch on just 2 of them, the Scamper and the Break It Down. But this idea, there's 7 other ways that you can really leverage that with examples. And then also a free guide to what are the best jobs for 2020 and beyond. One of the cool things that that turns me on is the future? What are some of those kind of things that are happening with all of that? And again, so they can gonna go to www.WildeSpark.com/getwild. And again, wild is WILDE. So again, www.WildeSpark.com/getwild, and they'll be able to access all those downloads.
Awesome. Kevin, dude, you are the man. Thank you so much for coming on today. I love what you're about, bringing that lifeblood, that life force back into the world. And everyone, you definitely want to stay connected with Kevin. Go to WildeSpark.com, and that's wild with an E, and stay connected with him and let him know. Let him know that you heard about him from this interview. Let him know what you got, what your biggest takeaways were, and give him that feedback so that he knows what's working in his marketing. Give him that market feedback because he's rocking it. And Kevin, thank you so much for being on today, and we look forward to seeing you again soon, man.
Sounds good, Chris. I really appreciate it, and keep up the great energy. This is fun.
Thank you, brother. We'll see you soon.
Bye now.